Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Futures seminar. I'll be your host today. My name is Tamira and I'm a Senior Advisor and Futurist here at the Institute. To those of you who might be new to us, we are an independent non-profit futures think tank. We work across a spectrum of future studies and foresight advisory and have been doing so since our founding in 1969. Myself, personally, I've been lucky to work here for the past 11 years with strategic foresight and futures thinking, and been fortunate to work with many great organizations and also many great people. One of them will join us today. And around the world, really applying strategic foresight in different contexts. And related to the topic today on hindsight, insight and foresight, I think it's relevant to mention that before joining CIFS, I spent many years abroad in London, Milan, Florence, New York, etc., working for typical or traditional trend forecasting companies, so in relation to the more short-term future. And then slowly transitioning into working with more longer term or more contextual change, and actually in relation to more explorative and ethnographic consumer studies, again for various organizations, and translating these into strategies. And that is what I've prepared and prepared to discuss and unfold today with our guest, because I think it's super important to understand these connections and interconnections of approaches, specifically when applying it to shifts in behavior and consumers and lifestyles that are somehow closer tied to our present. And even more so, it becomes relevant to also discuss the distinctive values and lenses of interpretation of each of these approaches and what they offer us in our attempt to understand and explore the world around us. And when saying that, I guess that I'm already a bit biased, actually, as the field of sociology and cultural studies is and has been my guiding principle for years in deciphering change and transformation, and the interconnected, often invisible cultural underpinnings that play such an important role within society at large, but specifically also for communities, organizations, and consumer groups. So to help challenge or at least mature my biases, I've asked a brilliant mind to join me today to help us unfold this topic. And I'm joined by Leah Aitson, who is futurist at the H&M Group. And we'll get back to our guest shortly. One thing that I think is crucial to highlight before we jump into our discussion and conversation is really this how we are understanding the future and how it isn't about looking at isolated moments. Again, back to the topic of today of hindsight, insight and foresight, but really recognizing how our past and present and potential futures are deeply interconnected. Especially again when exploring people and how our behaviors continuously evolve in terms of how we live and work, communicate, consume, etc. And I have I have this long-term favorite quote of mine from my previous sociology professor, David Oswald, who said that to study a culture means not to analyze the habits and customs, beliefs, ideas and arts in an enclosed and isolated place, but to investigate the connections and the disconnections, the circulations and movements, the ups and downs that makes a culture, a living culture, above and beyond its singular location. And I just think that really coins well, at least my perspective and my add to this conversation. So also what that means that in terms of finding all these interconnections and movements, it means that we will not be able to give you a one-size-fits-all approach here. A little disclaimer. But we will do our very best to pass on some valuable insights, also as practitioners in this field that, for all of you to consider. So let's get to it. Very pleased to be here. And as we go along, please go ahead and post your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to address some of them towards the end. Now, let's get to our expert. Thank you so much for Leah for being here and joining us today. And when I asked you if you could join us today, it was also because I know that you have so extensive experience working in the FMCG world, and also experience in your quest of understanding people. And finally, I can add that you are also super interesting in this seminar as well, the topic for this seminar, as you're really focusing on adding future capabilities or mindsets and approaches to your toolkit, to this equation or to this cocktail, you can call it. So Leah, would you mind giving us a short introduction to yourself and your work?
Sure. Thank you so much, Tamira, and thanks for having me on the seminar. My background is in human-centered design, working mainly in design leadership roles on the consultancy side before making the shift to in-house and to H&M. And the reason for that shift was really my wish to work more holistically and long-term and on impactful challenges and opportunities. And when I started H&M almost 9 years ago, I was part of introducing and scaling a more customer-centric way of working through service design and design thinking, particularly then in the space of business development and innovation. And practically, I've spent a lot of time collaborating and co-creating with customers and internal stakeholders for the first few years. And I've really loved being in that intersection because it's a space for curiosity and creativity and learning and really challenging our perspectives. And then for the past few years, I've focused quite a bit on how we work in the space of innovation. Because, as the world changes rapidly with increased complexity and uncertainty, how we innovate also needs to adapt. So my personal movement into futures and foresight has really grown out of the need to facilitate new types of conversations. And so essentially we've been focused on innovating how we innovate and looking at who we need to be that looks different from what it used to look, and also how we build new capabilities that makes us more resilient for what could be going forward.
Great, and thank you again, Leah, for joining, and welcome to this seminar and this topic. And I completely agree with you, because we also see here at the Institute a greater and greater need for, actually both bridging, but also differentiating between insight and foresight, as well as being curious ourselves about our biases and assumptions, right? So I think in our work with futures-oriented leaders like yourself and foresight practitioners, especially in the context of consumer shift or FMCG, I often come across this strong interaction, right, between working with insight and foresight. And I think there is still, in terms of the differentiating part, it's important in some way to really highlight that insight is about making sense of what we know, analyzing data and identifying patterns and deriving meaning from existing knowledge or information, both quantitatively and qualitatively, right? And it's a really powerful approach in this sense, for understanding where we are today, and uncovering aspirations and needs when it comes to understanding consumers, based on what we already know. And then foresight, on the other hand, is about looking ahead and identifying these emerging signals and preparing for what we don't yet know. And it's a skill more of anticipation and exploration. And in that sense, foresight really allows us to explore plausible futures and recognize these uncertainties, right, about what we don't know yet. And in that sense, equipping us to not just predict one inevitable outcome, but be ready for a range of possibilities, right? So I really believe that we need to think actively about how to bridge the short-term and maybe more data-driven projections and the long-term, more explorative potential futures. But I don't know, Leah, what is your view on this?
No, I agree with you, Tamira. I think that there's a need for distinction between the two, absolutely. But both are needed, and they're not mutually exclusive. And in fact, I really think that it's a lot more productive to recognize the interdependence. But it also requires you to know what you're using it for and when and why. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, I guess it's also a matter of sometimes the spaces in between, right? Of when you can transition, or when you can apply what you know in terms of the present, and then start making your projections in more the short term, and then moving into more foresight when it's the long-term uncertainty. So what has been your approach with this?
Well, I have a lot of talented colleagues, of course, in the internal insights community that are working on insights on different levels and for different purposes. But if I'm speaking from the bulk of my own experience coming from service design, in practical terms, it's been about getting a better understanding for our existing and potential customers, and really understanding how they think and how they feel and how they act. And personally, I've done a lot of qualitative research, spending time with fashion consumers around the world in interviews and observations, but also interviewing and shadowing store staff and customer service agents to learn through them about customers and their needs and behaviors and drivers and expectations. But I really do think that the value of those insights is what we do with them, right? How we act. So how can we activate the right type of conversations with our stakeholders and stretch our collective thinking? And if we go to innovation, where I'm mostly based now, we've made quite a shift actually over the past few years, where we've intentionally stayed longer in the problem space before we move into the solution space. And in this space, we need more than what design thinking might offer, and that's where strategic foresight has been quite helpful. But as with everything, we're on a journey, and we're exploring and maturing our way of working to really fit our organizational needs. But I wanted to ask you, Tamira, from your experience and working with a number of different organizations, is this shift something that you're recognizing and seeing more and more of?
I mean, there's definitely a shift in terms of seeing the value of foresight as a way of broadening the horizon. I definitely see that. And I think it's interesting also what you mentioned about working qualitatively, and how you can use that as both in terms of insights for the present, but I'm actually also I'm a strong believer in qualitative approaches, and to some extent there is also that there is in terms of foresight, it's both quantitative and qualitative. But in terms of the qualitative, I really feel the value of this approach in terms of understanding underlying dynamics and being able to map a little bit, go beyond what is the what, but looking into the why, And also coming from a background where I've done a lot of ethnographic fieldwork, I really had another wonderful quote from one of the founders of cultural anthropology, Margaret Mead. What people say and what people do and what they say they do are entirely different things. So actually also back again to when it comes to the consumer and understanding how the consumer might change needs, aspirations, behaviors in the future, it becomes more, in my opinion, more about understanding the why than understanding the what, if we really want to make that, building that bridge. And I also see synergies between actually the methodological underpinnings of ethnography, in terms of we could actually also say that we're doing ethnographic fieldwork in a future scenario context where we're immersing ourselves into what this scenario might mean, right, for consumers or for people at large. Moving on, and as I said in the beginning, in the introduction, I'd also like to unfold a little bit the hindsight part with you. And again, from the context of consumers specifically and behavior overall. But to me, hindsight is, I understand it as the past experience, past beliefs, structures, past rituals, traditions and myths, and all these things that kind of shapes and informs and reiterates as well our being in the world and how we navigate in everyday life. Also in relation to change, as well as how this hindsight backpack, you might say, how all this can also, challenge or reiterate or reiterate, in future worlds. So I think that's a super important part as well, to kind of build or add to, the exploration per se. And in some ways, I believe that it also relates very much to the notion of culture in that sense. And although there is no real single definition here, but if taken from the position that culture can be kind of defined as a set of human behavior that is passed on down from one generation to the next, so in more of an anthropological way, but also refers to this large set of more intangible aspects of social life, like values and beliefs and systems and language, and that people share in common, and as such can be used to define them as a collective, which is the more sociological, right? So in culture and related to hindsight, in other words, is something that we all have as humans, that we depend upon for making meaning. And it kind of helps us as a way to, unfold our actions or our decisions, or guide them in the context of, families and communities and workplaces and peer groups and environments. So, and as for to link that to consumers again, and I remember one of the first trend forecasters I was ever introduced to, the so-called trend guru, Faith Popcorn. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she said, we live in a consumer culture, and when we change what we buy, we change who we are. So in that sense, the whole hindsight or the cultural aspect is super, super interesting, in my opinion. But Leah, I'm really interested as well in hearing your perspective and point of view regarding this.
I think culture and behavior is such an interesting topic. I could spend the rest of the seminar talking about that, but I don't know. We had a conversation way back, Tamir, I think, that where we talked about people as icebergs, and then behavior is really what we see. It's the tip, right? So it's what other people see in us, and it's what we see in other people. But what is it that sits beneath the sort of waterline? and what is like running our behaviors. That's our needs, right? Whether they are met or if they're unmet, and it's our values and our priorities, and it's our thoughts and it's our feelings. So if hindsight is understanding where we're coming from, it could also help us understand emerging expectations. And I find that super fascinating.
Yeah, so in the end, it also becomes a matter of asking the right questions, you could say, or challenge a bit also our perceptions, right? Understanding what lays behind. And I think actually come to think of one interesting thing when it comes to perception is we here at the Institute we have quite a strong focus on health as a focus area. And when you look at how health has changed in terms of perception, so from the 1950s and now how it's expanded from being primarily about being physically healthy and not sick, and now the more holistic way, mainstream perception of being mentally healthy, socially also healthy, and even we're talking about planetary health, right? So seeing really how perceptions change over time and how that also guide our behavior and changes in behavior and values going on is really, really interesting. I don't know if you have something similar in relation to that.
No, I think that, when it comes to health, and I think that pandemic is an example that we keep, bringing up, right? But I also think that, the pandemic, that was something that happened to all of us, right? But we had very different experiences depending on where in the world that we live. But then I'm also thinking about, the kids experiencing the pandemic during their formative years, and how might that affect future culture? I think that would be interesting to see how it unfolds. But also on the topic of hindsight, Tamira, how do you see the role of hindsight in the organizational context?
That's another perspective, and I think actually that's also super important to bear that in mind, especially when introducing or working with change and transformation, to really understand. Like you mentioned the iceberg, right? So understand the underlying levels in that iceberg when it comes to organizational culture, and really see, what might work as a driver for, something new being added to the organizational culture, or what might be a barrier. So really understand what traditions, what rituals, what myths or discourses, and all that, how that can actually also have quite a strong an influence in organizational culture. And I wonder if I don't know, Leah, if you can share any key learnings, or going beyond traditional consumer research methods, and to understand this complexity actually that you also mentioned in the beginning of the world around us, that is becoming more and more complex.
I don't know. I think I keep coming back to, again, where we started the conversation today, and it's not either or, and we need a combination of insight and foresight, and the values really in what we do with it. But for me, it's also it's a team sport. So when we combine insight and foresight and spend time collaborating, we learn more, and we learn more together. And then I also find that when you put in some kind of material, like some sort of trigger material, it really stretches the conversation and imagination even further. And here you can be a lot more speculative, which is something that my heart kind of beats for those type of things. When you add those things in, it becomes a lot more fun and creative.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think actually also from our perspective, being provocative maybe, or trying to stretch but also you mentioned teamwork and or team sport, right? But then being also sometimes an interdisciplinary team sport, where you really invite different perspectives in, maybe adding in the beginning to the complexity, which can be frustrating, or challenging. But in that sense, really finding the strength in different perspectives to challenge again, back to the beginning, biases and assumptions that we might have because we are, positioned in our own world, our own everyday life, and even though we might read the news every day and feel like we're, following everything that's going on, our way of perceiving the world is still, very much related to our own way of understanding and the culture, again, back to the hindsight, right, of our own positioning in the world. So really adding different disciplines to that team sport, I think is, super important. Leah, I was also wondering if you, in terms of this space of insight and foresight, and applying that as a practitioner, are there any challenges and opportunities that you have come across here that you would like to share?
I think there's something around mindsets versus tools that I don't think is to be underestimated. And this actually goes back to, where I started talking about design thinking and where the promise kind of became that everyone can be a designer, right? So just use this process and these methods. And I believe that kind of bruised design thinking, and it sometimes even undermine the value that it could bring. And I worry that strategic foresight could be heading down the same path. So the tools are there to help, but they aren't the solution. So you really have to invest the time, and you really have to think about, what role do I play in this, and what do I bring to the table, and how do I look at this, and how do I use the tools? So yeah.
And back again a little bit to what you mentioned about the problem space, right? To
Exactly.
Also to invest time in understanding the problem space and understanding what approaches or what tools to be used here, or that are best or most applicable in that. And I think, in my experience at least, before CIFS, it was very much about not investing maybe too much time in that problem space, but really heading right for the solution. And I think you're right that might become even more relevant, actually, also because of the complexity. So really making sure that we understand the problem space before trying to solve it. All right. I'd actually like to end on a more speculative and open-ended note, if you don't mind, Leah. But what do you think will surprise us or people overall the most about consumer behavior in 10 years, and why?
I think most likely a lot of things would surprise us, and that's probably the only thing that we can be sure about, right? I don't know, but if I'm speculating, I'm thinking that, the future consumer will feel and be empowered, and really informed and self-sufficient, and really leveraging technology to make decisions. And I think that makes for a really exciting innovation opportunity, which in turn then will, of course, impact consumer behaviors. And I don't know, if I throw it back to you, I don't know, can you maybe let us in on what your own main uncertainties are, say, for the next 5 years?
Yeah, well, and true, because that is, what we work with every day, is to look at the uncertainties and how different trajectories might unfold. I think what I'm very curious about and think is super interesting is our relationship with technology and our digital lives. And not so much in the sense that, obviously, tech is here to stay and we lead digital lives, but how will we be moving towards a more, can you say, tech centric driven culture or consumer behavior, or will it be more like human centric driven? How will this be? Because we're seeing a shift already now in terms of, well, I guess increasing awareness and regulation and different ways of kind of paddling a bit in terms of this complete wow of everything digital, and at the same time we're seeing amazing opportunities and new ways, innovation and ways of making lives easier and better, and so how will that unfold in terms of our relationship with tech? I think is an uncertainty that I'm curious to follow, and same goes actually for our sustainable consumer behavior and also related to our health behavior, because both of them in a way refer to this great tension I find between awareness and indulgence, or purpose and convenience, and so like it's such within each of us, and we have to navigate that kind of battleground a little bit, which is a completely I don't know if you can say normal, but a normal tension to have as human beings. But I think that is really interesting, because there are different ways that, again, different opportunities, different challenges that will kind of make that tension evolve, also in terms of our behavior. And then if we're looking a little bit on the longer time horizon, I'm super curious to see also everything about demographic changes and how that will impact us and our consumer behavior, and how we're living, obviously, but what will these demographic changes mean for future family constellations, single household, aging populations, and also the fragmentation or the plurification that we're witnessing, and how will what will be the drivers and barriers or opportunities and challenges in this, and also how will we, our motivations for consumption, how will that be more liquid on the longer term, and open up. So I don't know if you have anything more to add, Leah, but I am also quite curious to see if we have any questions from whoever is listening in. Are you ready for that?
Yeah, let's go into the questions.
Let's go into the questions. Super. Let's see here. Let's see. For you, Leah, how have you started your futures and foresight journey?
Good question. I think it's been a little bit of a natural movement, mainly like driven by, I don't know, the need and like curiosity to learn, I think. But the way I've practically started, I've been doing kind of what I always do. I reach out to a lot of people, and I stalk people that I kind of look up to, and I take meetings, and I've had a lot of really, really good conversations just over the past year with new people in this field that I haven't talked so much to in the past. And I really found that so many people are so generous and so willing to share about their experiences, and really wanting to just bring me along for the ride. So I don't know, to anyone listening in, thank you for letting me piggyback on you. But then I also think that, I don't know, you guys, SIFs, and the Foresight Practitioners Network that you provide, for me, that's also been such a good forum to be in, where I meet people like me who are in large organizations. And again, people are so willing to share I don't know what they've learned. Obviously, more around like these processes have really worked for us, or these tools have been amazing, and here are barriers that we've run into, but also here are some I don't know, magic tricks that have actually worked. And I don't know, I feel like I pick up a lot on that. So I don't know if that answers the question completely, but I think that's one wave that I've taken on this new role of mine.
Yeah. No, definitely it does answer. And great also to be able to really bounce off one another, right? In terms of others and maybe even different industries, but sharing experiences. I think that also is super important. Okay, let's see here. There's one here that I find a very good question. How do you balance the work on mapping hindsight, insight, and foresight? Different team members or whole teams are usually drawn to one, putting a lot of time on it. I don't know. I think if I should go first, then you can add to that, Leah. I think it's about, again, keeping in mind how we can really understand or remind ourselves of our biases and assumptions. So not that we have to have a dedicated team only looking at what kind of culture is present here and there, and but or insights in terms of, but actually really trying to stretch that mindset and applying it in a way where if we are primarily, for my part, invested in foresight and futures thinking, again back to one of my points in the beginning. It is not about isolated moments. It's about really just asking, keep on asking, and also on the various projects with various partners, keep on, questioning the assumptions or leading it back to, are there underlying layers here that are informing the way that we're connecting these, right? So I guess that's my best answer in that regards. I don't know, Leah, if you have anything here to add.
No, I kind of agree, and I think that it sounds like maybe I repeat myself, but again, I talk a lot to my insights colleagues, and I think it's in that conversation and where we're like, okay, well, what questions should we be asking ourselves based on whatever it is that we're learning, whatever type of insight, right, and on whatever horizon that insight is. So it's in the conversations, it's how we activate them, and then. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I repeat myself, but it's really in the conversation and in the problem space. What does this mean for us, and how do we want to respond to it?
Mm-hmm. And I guess also, like we've been touching upon before, but if you can actually work interdisciplinary, and like you say that you have conversations with different teams, and trying to explore different ways of looking at it, but also different academic backgrounds, or like trying to stretch that, also your own comfort zone sometimes. I think it is.
And also, just to jump, one last thing I think is like we do have different backgrounds and we do have different strengths, and I think that if we learn how to play those different strengths, we're going to be a whole lot better. And so not everyone needs to be an expert in everything, and I think that's something that I take with me as a facilitator. How can I bring the experts together? That's really where we create the real value.
No, really. I completely agree. And I'm also just thinking again back to actually my experience with ethnographic fieldwork, that often when I had been doing these studies, I would be confronted by my own, how can you say, sometimes even prejudice, or just simply I did not understand. And one rule of thumb was that whenever I encountered that with myself, I was like, there's something here I need to understand, because now I'm creating some kind of reaction here. So this is really important that I understand this, and maybe we can even try to apply that in even foresight processes even more, or like being aware of when something is kind of tickling or bothering you a little bit, then you need to investigate that even further. Because there might be some potential or a deeper level of understanding, right? All right. Okay, there are a lot of questions. I have one here. So that is more in terms of the longer view. What contextual shifts or megatrends do you think will influence consumers in the future? And well, I can go firstly, and then you can add to this. I guess this is for both of us. I touched upon already the demographic shifts. I guess also what I see as interesting, and how it will influence not just consumers but also people like overall. But what we see in terms of a greater polarization of society, different levels, not just in terms of wealth but also different kinds of literacy when it comes to digital literacy or health literacy. Also, I guess one great contextual change is also urbanization, and how, whether we're living in first-tier cities or second-tier, third-tier cities, and then in comparison to more rural areas, how that will really, we're also seeing a shift here that most likely will impact us as consumers a great deal. And then also our mobility patterns, I guess, in the end, how we will move around, and that is then has to do with our work lives and everyday lives, etc., etc. So that is what comes to mind. I don't know, Leah, if you have any other contextual shifts or greater, longer term.
No, I'm also like looking at emerging lifestyles and maybe aging populations, and as you say, like, okay, well, urban developments, and it will be very interesting to see how we move around. And I don't know, coming back to maybe like fashion consumption, it's like, okay, well, what will cities look like in the future? And the need to go to a store versus what will that look like? I think that's super interesting to follow.
Yeah, no, true. And also the whole aspect of sustainability, right? I know I just mentioned it a little bit, but I think that is something that is really going to have a huge influence if you look at contextual change. And we have reached the end of this webinar. And again, Leah, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. I look forward to continuing the conversation with you another time. So thank you
so much for having me.
Thank you. And if you can recognize yourself in some of the issues that we have covered today, and of course you are then more than welcome to reach out to us at SIFS. And this is what we do, and we also work hard to facilitating networking around strategic foresight for our partners, as Leah's mentioned. So thank you so much for tuning in, and feel free to reach out and continue the conversation. And I think all that's left to say is we wish you all happy holidays. We're getting there, and all the best for the new year to come. Thank you so much.